yeah, we're really excited now to have Michael Moore speak with us. He has over 20 years of helping companies use agile values and principles. And I know for me personally, as I was a new Scrum Master and working at getting into agile coaching as well, that I really enjoyed hearing from him. There's a lot of stuff that I blatantly rip off as well in my own coaching. So thank you for that, Michael. And with that, we will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. And let me get the shared screen going here so we can start our conversation. Make sure we got that technical hurdle out of the way. You guys seeing it?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, great. So, and I want to move my panels around here so I'm not blocking my view here. All right. So here we are today. So, as I contemplated and as Steve and company asked, hey, you want to come and fill up a spot? I have been thinking a lot about transformation pitfalls, and it's probably on a lot of our minds always. And so I thought, let's just throw some stuff together and really hopefully have a great conversation about what we're seeing out here as far as pitfalls are concerned. I do have some tricks, but as you know, sometimes the pursuit of agility can feel a lot like chasing unicorns. So with that, let me just go ahead and get through a couple of things. First of all, well, let me go back. If you thought this was me, I just want to clarify. I mean, pretty close in resemblance, and we have a lot of the same credentials, but that's not actually me. So everybody, this is my icebreaker typically for those who know me, and we get into, wait, Michael Moore, you're that director guy? And pretty much that's what I claim to. So enough of that, but I would like the award. I'll take that. Jason, appreciate the introduction. You guys will have access to this this presentation that I'm going to be sharing here with you today. And so there's some contact links and some more about me, but enough about that. So look, I hope we have some fun today. I hope there's some giggles and maybe some laughs, but look, I hope for mostly your participation. There might be some other typical working agreement things that we should all know, like, hey, mute when you're not speaking, those kind of things, or holler at me if you have a question. I'm good with that too. And I know also we'll be having people monitoring the chat. And so if I'm not catching that, feel free to, raise a hand or something, somebody will catch it. So, but really hoping for your questions, your comments, your thoughts as we go through this. And to the SEU comment, I'll try really hard not to actually have you lose any knowledge, because that can happen sometimes. And or maybe I can make it an hour and 1 minute, since apparently we can round up. So then you get even more bonus. Whatever you want to do, we'll just try to play with it here a bit. So, all right. So let's. I just want to make sure that we're really clear about what I'm talking about here today. It's not the application and practicing agile stuff, which is all great, right? And there's a lot of great stuff out there about it. It really is about the challenge of organizational transformation. And so, maybe some of you are in a position where that's applicable right now, or maybe some of you are wishing that you were, or thinking about it. Either way, I think we sometimes mix those two together, and really I see them as two different things. And that kind of gets us into our challenge here. When we go into organizations, typically, right, we see this hierarchical thing, and we've got leaders, and we've got communication going on all over the place. We got our systems that we have, and bugs, and different things that all organizations have that keep them really on their toes all the time and struggling and maybe not producing exactly what they want to. So, all right, we know that picture, and that's typically what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. But what we want, right, we hear this notion of agile, and we say, oh yeah, those agile teams that got product owners, scrum masters, these little cross-functional units, and they build systems that are independent, they're aligned, but we can do a lot with those, right? And so this dream starts to spin up in somebody's mind, maybe a director in an organization, or just some team members thinking, hey, I love this way of working. I want it to be different. Sometimes we have, leaders, executives who are asking for this kind of stuff, and then their notions go even bigger, and they're thinking, wow, we could have this humongous agile organization where everything is just hunky-dory, and we have all these things that we talk about like COPs, and value streams are a thing for us. So okay, that's all great and everything, and I think that that's admirable. Maybe this is the start of the unicorn, though. Maybe not. So it does pose a challenge, though. How do we get from where we're at, whatever that might look like, to this ideal state that we have in our minds that we want to get to? This is essentially the transformation challenge. So that brings us to the pitfalls of despair. Well, maybe. I mean, it depends on what your flavor of pitfall is. Maybe you just like the shovel and you like digging them for other people, but really, I view this, and there's a lot of different pitfalls, of course. I kind of boiled it down to 3 main areas of consideration. One, the bill of goods. How did we start off this way? And we'll get into that. What are executives buying into? And then we have this other pitfall, leadership in general. What does that mean? And what is their role? And how does this work? It's different than what we're used to. And then, of course, the actual execution of this and the vision and strategy that comes with it, or lack thereof. So these are the areas we'll cover. And at any point, again, please feel free to chime in, and we'll answer any questions we can as we go here. All right, so pitfall number 1. We've probably all seen Scott Adams' great contribution to the agile world, and I love the meme, so I will, put out every meme to try to make sure that we're getting a message across here. But this is something that oftentimes we run across, this bill of goods, the benefits, the task at hand, and the cost that leaders are buying into. And as you see in the Dilbert cartoon here, maybe we just don't care. We just really want what we want, and we're not really interested in that. And so we're quick to buy whatever people are selling. In some ways, we do that ourselves when we're selling the prospect and the opportunity that agility might bring. So let's go into the details of these pitfall sub-bullets here. So what do I mean by the bill of goods and the benefits of it? Well, you hear this all the time. You might hear it in your current organization. We've got to get things out faster. I want people, and you can imagine the hamster on the wheel, and the wheel's just about ready to fly off, right? Well, that's kind of the notion that they get. The Agile is going to allow us to spin that wheel faster in some cases. And in others, they're even thinking with less people, right? I can do that with less resources. And so ultimately, boy, I can get a bigger bang for my buck because I'm going to reduce costs. Well, and then somebody might say some of these, and this is an actual quote I've heard, I'm going to get you 150 million in productivity gains in 18 months or less. Well, maybe it's possible, but either way, somebody just got sold something. And while some of these might be close to what we're trying to look for, this is often what executives I found hear and expect. And so that's one of the hurdles. That's the pitfall, is that now their expectation is set on these kind of benefits. Versus, what do we want them to have an expectation to? Well, you've all seen a version of this before, I'm sure, right? Where we really are thinking about outcomes, of course, but on the left, we have the typical drivers behind why Agile can be beneficial for us, right? We're going to gain higher visibility. That means whatever we're working on right now, we're going to have a better understanding of where things are at. Adaptability. Well, we've heard all of our customers say we can't change quick enough. Well, there we go. We're saying that we're going to have high adaptability throughout the project. Well, business value. Of course, every executive is thinking about business value, and this is something we'll hit on later a little bit. But the notion of actually delivering something sooner is something that isn't necessarily the same thing as faster, right? But the business value behind that is what we are considering, because we're actually looking at building something that customers want. And then a big one I hear a lot, and it depends on the industry you're in, but a lot of organizations that I've helped are financial or maybe they're healthcare, so risk-based organizations. And you hear a lot of conversation in the executive forums about risk management. So we're always thinking about those things. These right here are what I would tell you we need to focus back on. And if your executives are askew from this, have a conversation. Let's get back to what we believe the benefits are. Now, I might say this throughout the conversation, and feel free to do how you would do. But my suggestion is, if we can't come to alignment on this, it might be a good opportunity to run away, because potentially the transformation at large is doomed to some failure. So. All right, so that's benefits. Well, what about the task? What are we trying to do, right? What does the transformation entail? And we hear this all the time. Hey, well, we're going to apply a framework. Which one? Well, any of them. I mean, does it matter? Well, we hear a lot about frameworks, and often again, when we're trying to sell this and we're trying to help convince and anchor around an objective, oftentimes the task becomes something about training and applying that framework. Well, if teams would just do Scrum, then we'll have an agile organization. Totally dismissing the fact that there are a lot of other parts to the organization, of course. By the way, Laughable, if you haven't looked up that framework, I highly advise it. That's Mike Cohn way back in the day. And maybe if you find it, there's your little Easter egg. So, but again, what we really want to consider, this is maybe an additional warning here, when we're applying frameworks, remember that old, typical organization we have, we're not really addressing changing the organization, we're just applying a framework over it, and that looks even more complicated. And in a lot of ways, it can be. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But really what we're trying to do is, remember, our objective to have this great agile organization, or an organization that's successful, right? But the more things that we focus on, think batch size, the less likely we're going to be able to be successful at any of them. So be careful about framing this as a training or framework exercise. I'd advise that, in my Success, that we have had great conversations about just organizational change and talking about the things that actually matter, like instilling principles and values. We know the Agile Manifesto. That is what I would say is Agile. If we're trying to adhere to something, let's talk about those things. Let's make sure that we have that in our minds at every level of the organization, including those who were apparently getting bought into this notion. And remember, Agile is a mindset. We need to make sure that people are understanding that that's the case, right? So the frameworks help us, but this is really about trying to adhere to principles and values. Again, run away if maybe that's not the desire. One other thing to add here, it might be helpful. This is Agility Health, or Agile Transformation Inc., who creates the Agility Health software, the radars. This is their view of the world of transformation. Again, if you're having conversations with leadership, these are the kind of things that you want to convey to them about the scope or the task at hand that we have, so that they're framing in their mind what this really looks like. It's not just these trainings, and we're not just going to get certified in these certain things, but we actually have a whole organization of things to think about that we should be framing in order to make sure that we're moving the organization forward. Okay, so the final one here in Bill of Goods is really the cost. And I've heard things all over the place. And it's really an interesting dilemma. And I think we have hurt ourselves a bit as agilists in trying to approach this problem by suggesting that we might be able to sneak our way in. And then, over time, they'll continue to buy into this idea that we need more. And actually, that's been successful to a degree, at least as if your goal is to go in and, have a job for a long time, or maybe make a lot of money as a consultant or something like that. But for me, this is just me. I don't feel that is what I'm here to do. I would like to make sure that people understand that this is a commitment, that there are things that are going to be uncomfortable, that we are going to be on this journey for a long time, and that the investment that they are making into this is huge. It's probably one of the more significant investments they have made in all of their business history. And we can see evidence of that over and over and over again, of the billions of dollars that are spent every single year on just trying to reach these agility goals. So my advice, be upfront about what it is going to cost. It's not just money, it's also time. It's also understanding in like this J curve of change here, that things might get worse before they get better. And in a lot of cases, that tends to be the case, because change is not easy. And as we all know, the cost of change can be pretty heavy on an organization that's pretty set in the ways that they have been doing things. Okay, so these are the benefits and that bill of goods section that I was talking about. I just want to pause for a second, make sure that I'm not missing any questions or thoughts or comments as we get through this section here. Good. All right, or maybe not. Silence is, I don't know, we'll see. No chat either, right? I'm not getting chat, so. All right, so what about pitfall number 2? Leadership, generally, right? Maybe we have this idea about leadership that, they're sitting up in their ivory tower and drinking champagne or whatever they might be drinking, and just thinking, hey, all I have to do is make decisions, everybody goes and gets it done, right? Well, maybe in some cases, in some ways that's true. In my experience, I've found some other things that are also true. And so as we go through this, some of those sub items to this pitfall are the authority conundrum, like who has it? What does it mean? Where does accountability fit with that? This idea of leadership support, and then of course, management. And I'm sure we've all talked about these things as being the agilists we are, but let's go in and look at some of this stuff in detail. So let's talk about authority. It's a little bit tricky here. Some ways you can consider authority those who have the power to make decisions and to, basically move a dial from point A to point B, right? They have control. But also, there's the other side of authority. And something that we actually fail to identify often is the authority of agility, the authority of the expert. I find this over and over again where our agilists are coming in and not actually being put in a position of authority. And I don't mean that you or I as an agilist should necessarily go in and take over the company and own the kingdom, right? That's not what we're talking about. But what we are talking about is understanding that this idea of knowing and understanding what agility is, really probably takes time and it takes experience. And so recognizing that experience, you might have great nunchuck skills here, but do you actually have the ability to do what we're trying to do? Remember, organizational transformation, that's not just going in and training a Scrum workshop, although that can be part of it, it's not the extent. So recognize also that we got Dr. Strange here telling us that, of course, he's certified. Well, I also want to say that while I believe in education, I really do, certification sometimes in a lot of organization becomes the credential that qualifies you. And I'm here to tell you that that is a misstep. That's a failure. And beware of certification equals qualification. So what do we want to understand from this a little bit further? There's also this notion that with that authority, we're going to be able to move the pieces along the board in a certain way. In fact, here on the left, this is a model that I put together about situational leadership. Oftentimes that little blue box up there where we're forming and actually kicking off maybe a transformation or just a team in general, when we've got this bill of goods going, leaders are thinking, wow, hey, I love this. Well, let's get them formed now. And I expect them to perform really quickly. Well, when we're doing that, we're actually skipping some of the natural steps that happen in order for maturity to happen. So we've got to be able to make sure that we're conveying correctly that there is a process to this. And when the right authority isn't recognized to that, the agile authority here, the experts, oftentimes that message gets lost. We want to, of course, take in this idea that there's some willingness to even traverse down this difficult path of an agile journey. But we also need to recognize the ability that it takes in order to get there. There's going to be a lot of learnings for a lot of people. And yes, that does imply some training, but it also implies actually doing. And so we know we've heard this Tuckman model of forming, storming, norming, performing, right? I don't know if anybody's familiar with EDGE, but explain, demo, guide, empower. Maybe some old Boy Scouts out there might recognize that. These are things that we think about when we're traversing this path of growth. And we have to recognize this. This is something that we can establish with our leaders to help them make sure. And it helps to explain why the transformation process is going to take a long time to do that well, right? But also I want to say that, look, sometimes we misunderstand some of the opportunities we have when we're even given that authority as an agilist. For instance, sometimes we need to understand the culture at hand and use that to our advantage in order to move the ball forward. I know we all get high on and mighty on this idea of command and control is bad. That's not what we want. Well, that's true. I mean, ultimately, we would not like to have that. But if a culture is thick with that, and obviously the business is around, so they must have had some success there. It would be wise of us to think about, well, how can we harness that control for our sake? And a lot of times when we're forming, we actually do take on a lot of control. Take that authority that you have, that experience that you have, that expertise, and apply it and give direction. I know some of the greatest agilists that we all know have done this same kind of method over and over in order to break free from some of the struggles of the current cultural norms. So don't be afraid to take control. And then, of course, use your good situational awareness, right, to go through and transform as is necessary. This is also something, as we talk about reporting back and in a little bit later here, one of the things that you want to continually convey to leadership about where we're at as an organization and where the effort is in whether you're focusing on a specific pocket or not. So where are we at? Also understand, I mentioned this before, certification does not necessarily equal qualification. We have to understand that there is a growth path to this. Just because we've certified, 20 new Scrum Masters in our org doesn't automatically give them the experience that they need in order to be successful. So help leaders to understand that that is something else that we need to know, that we can have a good path to progression, but there has to be some understanding to the growth challenge itself and the challenge to get to that expert knowledge that we all want. All right, so that's a lot on authority. Well, okay, what about support? I love this meme. I think it fits pretty well. We keep saying that we want leadership support, right? Well, maybe when we bought into this, we actually set this this idea in motion, and really in asking for support, that's what they heard, and they decided, well, okay, sure, you have my support, go and do. But who knows what that means, especially as you're coming in as an agilist trying to help, or you're internal to the organization, you maybe already know what that means, and how that's been interpreted a lot of times doesn't go very far, right? You're not gonna, go home and sell everything else you have and invest in this support that they're offering you, because we know that it's more than support, right? We actually need, in order to be successful, to get through a transformation successfully, leadership participation. It is not enough for them to be on the sidelines and asking for things to get done and just being simply reported to. I'm a huge fan of Leading Change by Cotter, and he actually came out with a new book. So plug for him. It's called Change. I don't know, he left the leading off, I guess, this time. And it offers some insights into a model for change. And one of the things that I really have taken away from that over the years and have implemented in great success, actually, in a lot of organizations, is this idea of a leadership coalition. John Cotter talks about a guiding coalition. He really says a coalition is an unnatural team, right? It's a team that's formed that wouldn't otherwise be a team that you would think of. And so don't get too wrapped around the idea of the notion that this is a team. Understand the purpose of it, right? We have a lot of things moving, and not just the transformation, but the organization, of course, has delivery goals. So how do we keep all these things in balance, especially if we don't have a group of people who have, here it is again, authority. Now, this is the control authority we're talking about, to actually move the ball. So we want to make sure that we have, in our own way, since we've taken some of that agile expertise authority, empower leadership to be participating and making decisions about the transformation. So let's form them together. Cotter talks about creating a sense of urgency, right? And then, of course, building the coalition and forming a strategic vision, which is one of those pitfalls that we'll talk about here in a bit. And there's some other things with that. If you have been struggling with a framework, something that maybe leaders can buy in, this is one that's pretty popular, and a lot of leaders actually can understand pretty quickly. So my advice here for you is, do not let leadership sit on the sidelines. If they choose to not participate, again, you might want to run away. Likely that the transformation is doomed for failure, or at least a really short sailing. So, all right, the next thing, leadership management. Okay, well, we got this great little image here from Brian Solis, and he's not actually an agilist, but clearly the industry understands the frozen middle, right? So we're not the only ones, but one of the failures here is that we don't actually address that. I hear a lot of agilists and a lot of these organizations struggling to say, the frozen middle, and it's just hard to get, teams to do these things because we have this frozen middle in between the leadership who's asking, hey, are we transforming? Well, we need to take a more concerted effort to thaw out that middle. And it is definitely a pitfall for us to avoid or not to address, especially with leadership, the need to transform management. And so what we need and want to convey to them is that we want to turn managers into leaders. And we've seen this lots of different ways before, but some of the concepts are known. This is where we get into that notion of command and control, or the centralized decision-making is all by actually one person, and that tends to be management, right? And then when you get management that's really thick, you get things like I versus them, or inspired fear. That's actually a tactic that's employed sometimes. And one of the other things not listed on here that's an outcome of that frozen middle a lot of times is that leadership really does understand what they're wanting with the transformation, with buying into agility. And actually the teams do too. And what I found is that there's a communication blockage. So the frozen middle, it's hard to penetrate because communication both down, so the things that I'm communicating as a leader that I want, and up, the things that I communicate as a team member, showing that I'm aligned to those leadership things, gets missed. And so what we have left is this problem. So we need to take this effort to help instill leadership into the organization. Obviously, this is one of the biggest conundrums that we've heard in Agile, where does management fit in? They still fit in. And the more leaders we have, the better off we're going to be as an organization. There's a lot of other conversation about flattening the org and all that, but I'm not getting into that right now. I just really believe that it's a failure to not address taking time to transition and transform management into leaders. Okay, so before I move on, again, I'll kind of pause there. Any comments, thoughts, questions?
I would really like some sort of course into like, how do I talk to these leaders who are like live in the left-hand column, and how do I talk to them about living in the right-hand column? Because I want to be blunt and say like, what you're doing is not productive. It's not helping the team. So that was just my comment.
Yeah, Marcy, it's a great one. I know we probably often feel this, and I haven't really addressed this. And I kind of had this as one of the parting thoughts. But you know, I think we get comfortable, because if all we have to do is just teach the Agile practices and try to get teams to adopt, we can actually report on that, how well it's going, how well it's not. It doesn't always require us to actually challenge ourselves and put ourselves at risk by going and challenging those leaders. And this is, in my mind, a difference between someone who's really being a transformationalist versus what I would say is a general coach. Both are needed, right? But and there's nothing wrong, because there's a lot of great coaching that goes on out there. But for me, at least, I feel like it's my job. That's what I'm hired for, is to go against the grain. And I am the unpopular one often. Some people might have heard this notion that, hey, you're not doing your job unless you're, getting threatened to get kicked out. Well, sometimes we snicker at that, a little tongue in cheek, right? But the reality is it feels that way. And so you have to grow. One of those skills you have to grow is some confidence. I will tell you, when I started doing that myself, it was amazing, the difference, not just for me, but it was amazing how many doors opened up. And I'm telling you, yeah, I was worried going in and saying, hey, I want to skip in 2 or 3 levels to go and talk to somebody that has that authority, who can really relate. But I found like, wow, there's actually a lot of people who are willing to listen. So remember that little notion of management doesn't always exist all the way to the top. So sometimes it takes a risk for us and a challenge of ourselves to go out beyond what we're comfortable doing in order to break free from some of these pitfalls. Thanks for your comment, Marcy.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you.
Michael, can I add a comment on the same? My thought listening to you along with Marcy's actually went quite well. Was I really appreciate the slide before where you talk about having the leaders participate. Because I think to Marcy's point, where sometimes we just don't really know how to go about it with the leaders, but this really prompted thoughts in my head of, how are my leaders participating right now, if they are at all? And if they're not, how do I want them to participate? And therefore, now the coaching door is opening. If I want them to participate a certain way, now how can I go about that approach with them? But so for me, the light bulb is this word participation, having them in there alongside with us. And it doesn't answer Marcy's question of how, because each case will be different, but it's sure getting my mind turning. So I really appreciated that portion of it.
Yeah, thanks, Kirk. I really appreciate that thought. And it is a great segue into this next section. And if there's other comments, please. But we do talk about that vision and strategy of the transformation itself. And there's some ways of how to start to engage and speak their language, if you will. And that's part of that strategy. Thanks again. Okay, so pitfall number 3, vision and strategy. I saw this cartoon and I couldn't help myself. because it speaks so well to what I think we've seen over and over and over again, right? You just call it agile. It's messy, right? Isn't that what agile is? I mean, we've heard so many different things about agile, right? Agile means you can change anything you want at any time. So apparently that's true. And so obviously it can be messy. But this isn't a success criteria, right? That can't be the goal. Be as messy as possible so we can say we're agile. I don't think that's it. We certainly have a few other deeper pits here. The goals at large. What are we actually focusing on? Us versus them. We see this all the time, and we probably talk about it a lot in our organizations. And measuring success. Are we measuring the right things? And to Kirk and Marcy, your points, are we speaking to measurements that actually speak to leadership and the executives who are really paying for a lot of this effort? So let's go ahead and dive in. Sorry to burst any bubbles that might be out there, but the goal, sorry, isn't to do, certainly, and actually it's not really to be agile. I know we all say that, and we do want to be agile, and we understand that there's a difference in doing versus being. However, that can't be the strategy. That can't be the strategy if we're really trying to change an organization that's never had agile before, had success, and needs to keep abreast and hopefully get ahead of competition. There's other driving factors. So what are they? Well, we've talked about these things too, business outcomes, but what kind of business outcomes? Here we go, thinking about bringing back in the rest of the organization. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but you'd see a lot more than just IT on here, right? Finances are huge. We talk about HR, we talk about operations, sales, marketing, everything that a business has to do is something that we should be considering, thinking about our goals. And more than that, right? What are the goals the organization itself has when you come in? Are you asking them, or are you already assuming that their goal is to just apply agile and do or be agile? Well, that would be a major pitfall. And so my advice to you is have a conversation with whatever level of leadership you're invited into. Start there. Do you know what the organizational goals are? What are you guys struggling with right now? How can we maybe address some of those things so that we're on the same page? They're already feeling pain about that. One of the best ways to endear yourself to any level of leader is to feel their pain. So empathy is huge, right? By the way, I mentioned profit growth on here. I've been a business owner several times, and I just have to tell you, sometimes we get a little caught up in saying, well, it's not about the money. I'm sorry, this is a business. And if you can speak finance, then you're going to win over a lot of executives. I will tell you, more than I can even remember, the biggest contributors to my success in helping organizations get over the hurdle of transformation is actually winning in with the CFO or somebody directly reporting to them. Why? They hold the numbers, and in some cases, they hold the purse too. So they actually guard what's going to be invested in. Well, if you can start speaking their language and talk to them about how this would look differently, how it might simplify their effort from an accounting standpoint, these are the things that become more substantial so that we can actually have the right focus on a transformation. We now have people who are bought into the right things and are partners with us. And back to that participation thing, they're willing and ready to open doors for you. Okay, all right. Well, vision and strategy, us versus them. We've seen this battle before. We've seen this play out. And a lot of times it's not just business versus IT. Although it is a big pitfall, and I still see it today, sadly, that agile is for IT. It's really unfortunate knowing how far, especially in the software world, that agile has come, and to know that people still think it's just what IT does. We're really missing something there. So don't take it for granted that they already assume that it's more than just IT. You need to make sure that it's clear that it's broader than this, right? And that is where, again, you can start to win in some other people. But business, there is a case if you have to start somewhere and you get to choose and you get to advise, but you can only start one place. I've actually had more success starting with business than I have with IT. That might be a conversation for another time, but there's other ways of approaching this. The other thing, again, recognizing the siloed nature of these organizations. If we have the notion that we're going to stay that way, well, of course, that's a major pitfall to us overcoming and being transformed. We need to sell, we need to pitch cross-functional, okay? Yes, we talk about that all the time about teams. And, if you're using some scaled framework, maybe it's trains or programs or team of teams, but it goes beyond that. Oftentimes I see us limiting ourselves when we're talking about cross-functional. Again, some of the biggest successes I've had are because I've taken this to the extent to know who are all of the people who are necessary to have a voice into whatever the deliverable might be. And that room gets pretty big. So I will tell you, sometimes again, we have to get away from the notion of what the right size is. Again, this is transformation, not the ideal state yet. So this is going to help us in making sure that we convey cross-functional clearly, is that we've got all of those other areas that we talked about measuring before, the business outcome areas. Well, there's players in that. You got risk and compliance in a lot of places. You've got legal, you've got HR, of course. How do they play into the cross-functional team? Start to go beyond just IT and go beyond just the product owner who might be representing the business and your dev teams when you're thinking about cross-functional. I challenge you to do that. That will reap a lot of success. Okay, quickly moving on here, just a time check here. Vision and strategy number 3, measuring success. Maybe you all stand in different places on this, but I think point measurement has been the bane of my existence as a transformationalist. So the less I can hear about measuring points is better. If we focus on outputs, this is what tends to happen. I've heard this kind of notion recently of, hey, well, if we can go ahead and have teams produce X number more points, we'll have this kind of productivity gains and this kind of financial gains. Well, already you're probably thinking about these things incorrectly. And so we need to challenge that. Remember, what we're measuring, metrics, is something that, well, we need to change behaviors with. That's data, that's informed decision-making. And if a metric, as it says here, won't change how you behave, sorry, it's a bad metric. And we as leaders and transformationalists need to call that out. We've heard the vanity metric stuff, but we need to really step up and lead here and get focused on what we are measuring. Couple areas of consideration, right? We know some of the general ones. Again, this is Agility Health and their radars, giving a plug, but competencies is something we should all be thinking about. And I think we do a pretty good job of this. There's 100 spreadsheets out there about, whether or not we're getting certain practices and things like that right. But it goes beyond that. Again, into the realm of business agility, that's something you should be thinking about because there's competencies there too. And also the business numbers, please put them up. I mentioned this before. If you want to win over people's hearts who are actually at the top, start tying the transformation effort to business numbers. You want to talk about profit and revenue and growth, then that's where you're going to really start to win. Okay, so we've gotten through the pitfalls. I've given some advice on that. And I want to leave some time for Q&A here, but a couple other tools and nuggets that I have come to really enjoy and appreciate as I've learned how to do this better throughout my career. This, you can call it a transformation canvas. It's the notion of 3-box might be something that you might be familiar with. This is kind of my version of it. When I think about the transformation at large, this is what I think about. And what I really want to do is have a conversation with leaders about what is the current state of affairs? What can we see in that current state? What are we measuring? What are our current objectives? And then I want to think about okay, what are your goals? What are the ideal states, right? Do we even have a vision of that? And what this does is it helps to organize our thoughts and put into perspective what it means to transform and where we're going. Oftentimes conveying that vision and that strategy is hard. And so this can help us to do this. This is a simple board. You can use sticky notes to start off with. You can get fancy and start putting all sorts of things. You might even have pictures about where you think that the organization is going to be in 5 to 10 years. But certainly we need to have something that can help guide us. This is intended to be a working document, by the way. Remember that leadership coalition? This is a tool I bring into them right away. We ask these questions. I don't have to necessarily bring this board up right away, but I'll introduce it. But we're still asking these same questions. And when we have an ideal state and we have an understanding of where things are at, obviously we'll refine this over time. We can start to frame, what are we doing next? So the left-hand column is where we're at. The right-hand column is pie in the sky. We need to understand that we're not getting there and what is the next step that we're taking. We have a lot of different things that we can start to take on, and we talked about a lot of those already. But again, the framework itself here, or the canvas itself, is intended to help guide a conversation and then have something that you can articulate better. Okay, so that's one of the things. And then speaking of articulating, as you're reporting out, I see so many decks full of all this information about how we're doing with regard to our transformation. Many times it needs to be simplified. And this is something I've used in the past and brought to different organizations. Just a simple way of looking at a couple of slides about how do we frame where we're at. Well, we created a purpose and vision in that previous canvas that we looked at. Are we recapping that every single time, whether we're reporting out to general audience or we're reporting up through our leadership? All of those need to have some frame, something that can start to get familiar with. This is simple. We're focusing on the right things. Objectives and key results get to start to be eked into these kind of things. So OKRs, you can start to build those right away. Also, don't have an eye chart that's, you just have to read everything, right? So show some good pictures, bring those measurements that we talked about in and put it in a nice, neat format. Again, don't get overly complicated with these things. I watch organizations all the time get wrapped around the axle about whether or not they're getting the slide deck right. I can't tell you how many times I have seen people who are about ready to report up to leadership spend hours and days nitpicking at the words and the view of the PowerPoint. I've been guilty of it before, and I'm sure many of us have, but talk about waste. Let's just make it simple for ourselves. Finally, we all know about what a roadmap looks like. Make it simple for them, right? But still, this is about applying agility now. We're starting to show the right things, and we're starting to have the same kind of things that we would expect. And last but not least, I would suggest that value stream mapping has been invaluable to me. And what I found when people start to go down that road is that their minds get blown, and it becomes this big mess of too complicated for me to even to go at. I'm telling you that you can start simple. It doesn't have to be more than a handful of sticky notes to start to convey what does it take for us to flow value through our organization. That becomes something that I would expect to have here. When you're looking at your observations, have your value stream map up here. This is something executives, if they can visualize it, they can do something about it. That's been a huge benefit. When we get into actions and deliverables, oftentimes we're going back to the value stream map in order to decide what is in our improvement backlog. What are we trying to achieve? Well, let's reduce the time to delivery. What does that take? Now we can actually have a conversation around something that is real to them. Okay, so I've given all this, and again, I will share out this presentation for you all so you can have it. But I want to leave with this thought, or end maybe my part of talking, that, you know what, unicorns actually are real, you know, even if they're just fat gray and we call them rhinos. Transformation might be more like a rhino than a unicorn. And we just need to make sure that we're sitting down and having real candid conversations. And to Marcy's challenge before, and Kirk, we got to grow that confidence, and we'll never know until we try what's possible. So I challenge you all to do what you can to frame the transformation so that we can avoid all these pitfalls that we've all seen many, many times. All right, so that's my speech. Jason, I know you're running the show here. I don't know what we have for time, but I'm welcome to and open to any other conversation around any of this.
Yeah, did anyone have any questions for Michael?
No, more of a like, my mind is blown. You've connected a lot of dots for me. And so like, I don't have any questions because I still have to digest and see what this means for me in the organization I'm in. I'll probably have questions later, but for right now, it's just like, I feel like I have a master class. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. That's a great compliment. And there is a lot to learn here, so don't get overwhelmed. I put my contact information out there too. I really do believe in keeping the network alive, so feel free to reach out.
One question I have is you mentioned like learning to be able to talk about finance with the CFO and whatnot. Do you know of any good starting places for that? I come from a tech background, so my mind was always like, well, you guys deal with that stuff and I'll deal with my stuff, you know.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that you can endear yourself to the CFO or other financial leaders is by recognizing that, hey, I'm not a financial analyst. I'm not keen on that. When I think about numbers, keep it simple. Like, hey, I know that there's cost. I know that there's revenue, and somewhere in there that we equate profit. What would you have us looking at that's important to you? And open that door for them and start looking there. If you're trying to report some of those things, I'd also keep it simple. Even if you start getting comfortable with it, I'd keep it very high level. Think about like those big town halls where the CEO comes out and shares like a one slide about finances. I wouldn't go beyond that. It's just still anchored in some of those key things like costs, revenues, and then what is our overall outlook from a profitability standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, well, it's been a real pleasure. And so I just want to thank you all for sticking with it and going through this presentation, and look forward to chatting in the future.